What metrics do you absolutely have to monitor in your AWS environment on every single instance? Metric number one is CPU utilization and CPU burst balance credit. If you're using the T series of instances, which by and large I would recommend against once you're in a normal cadence of having a predictable workload, the bursting capacity is great when you're first trying things out. But for production workloads, by and large, I pretty much as a rule don't use any T series instances for this because I've been bit by the lack of burst balance credit at the times when the application is finally under load. So if you're using T series instances, make sure you monitor the CPU burst balance credit in there. And once that drops down to 0, all of a sudden that instance, which was previously, say, running on 2 processors, is now going to be cut down in half and be running on 1 processor. And if your application under load can't run at 50% of the number of processor cores in there, well, then you're in for a world of hurt and your users are going to be adversely impacted. So you want to set up an alarm on CPU utilization and CPU burst balance. Burst balance most importantly, but then CPU utilization, I set up an alarm for about a 6-hour sustained window, and this duration is going to be flexible and determined based on the specific instance's role. For example, if you have a database instance and it is regularly performing nightly backups, and as that database grows, that backup window might take longer and longer. So if you have a couple of terabytes that you need to back up regularly, that's going to take a while to dump out, doing the InnoDB backups or the database, MySQL dump or whatever your methodology is for backing up. That can just take a long period of time. So when I'm tuning that duration of how long I like to have before I'm alarmed because CPU utilization is high, at least for me, it's typically around 6 hours. And the thing that I'm looking for in my infrastructure is sustained utilization of an instance. So I care if like a zombie process is running away or if it's a worker instance and it's just continually chewing on something well above and beyond its typical utilization pattern. That's what I want to know so I can take a look at it. If you tune that number to be too short of a duration or to be just 1 out of 1 data point for like 5 minutes, you're going to be like hit every single time the instance is actually doing work. And that's not like useful in any way whatsoever, because an instance that's doing work, well, it should be doing work. In fact, you should be tuning the size of your instance to be hitting roughly, in my experience, around 60% CPU utilization before you really consider moving up to the next size. So if you're right around that like 40-50% utilization with spikes to 100% here and there, that's probably okay in most situations. The real problem though is when that instance is sustained at like say above 60%, 70% CPU for a really extended period of time, that you're going to want to keep an eye on that and set alarms around that. Metric number 2, this is all about disk utilization. Disk I/O, and again, the disk I/O credit balance. For GP2 volumes, alarms when your I/O credit balance is approaching 0. The other side of things, once again, similar to CPU, is I want to know if the disk I/O is being really high for a sustained period of time. Again, it's that same concept, which is if there's a lot of reads and writes going on a system outside of its normal pattern, I want to be aware of it so I can dive in and understand what happened. Did some piece of code change that all of a sudden is like making that system churn and work a lot harder? Is there something malicious going on? Or the more probable thing, was there a configuration problem that all of a sudden now it's like hitting the disk hard? If it's hitting the root partition really hard, maybe you have swap configured and in fact you need to allocate more memory to it. So now let's dive into some OS level metrics. Now these ones aren't going to be as easy to configure like in the AWS CLI because you're going to need CloudWatch metrics or another form of reporting pushed out from your instances like using Prometheus and Grafana or otherwise. But at the OS level then, I like to monitor a few other metrics. Metric number 3 that I like to watch at my disk side or in the instance OS level is free disk space on every volume. And that's because if I run out of space on my root partition, things once again may grind to a halt and I need to either resize things, clear out logs, get rotations going, or anything along those lines. So you need to make sure that you have visibility into the instance's storage volumes. And the other side of things I like to watch, it's similar to a disk volume, but it's really swap space. I configure swap on all my instances for the edge cases when I need it, but I really set the priority really super low on those. So that way swap is just minimally used. And I like to have everything stuffed in memory as much as possible. So if I'm running out of swap or I'm like hitting swap at all on an instance, I'm asking the question is, why is swap being hit from time to time or at a sustained level? And if that's the case, then I'm evaluating whether or not I need to allocate to a larger memory-sized instance. Now the final question. Okay, you've got these alarms configured, but how do you send them out? And there's really two paths that I like to set up in my environments. I either like to get notifications to an ops channel or a site reliability engineering team channel, and those are for non-critical events. So if a disk is running, there's 20% capacity remaining on it. That's not a critical event. It's not a PagerDuty wake someone up kind of event. So I'm not going to send that to the high urgency escalation. Instead, I'll just have a notification sent out to that channel, and I can review that as needed. I've got other tasks that are running, and once I've got some time available, I'll take a look at that, investigate, triage, fix it, and move on. However, sustained usage at the application level, maybe I'm monitoring latencies or otherwise, and if all of a sudden error rates start increasing in the application, those alarms are going to go to PagerDuty, and that will hit me or another engineer. It'll wake us up and let us know, hey, something really crazy is going on. And that's how I like to do my monitoring. So you can use an AWS Lambda template out there. It's pretty simple. You set up an incoming webhook on Slack, you set up that Lambda function, and then you have that SNS notification via CloudWatch, hit Lambda, which ultimately will send a HTTP post request to Slack, and then boom, now you've got your notifications wired up. And then for those urgent ones, I prefer using PagerDuty, and I send those out that way, and that's how the escalation works there. So those are the most essential things you need to monitor in your AWS environment as a small business operations engineer. Thanks so much.